I think we'll get started. We may have some additional people sort of wandering in, which is absolutely fine. And I wanted to first let you know I'm Rebecca Reynolds. I'm an assistant professor in the Library and Information Science Department here at Sky at Rutgers University. And I'm just absolutely thrilled today to be hosting Professor Mark Guzdial and Barbara Ericson, who both flew in last night from Atlanta, Georgia. And they are both research professors at the Georgia Institute of Technology. And I want to thank the LIS department, just a couple thank yous really quick, the Library and Information Science Department and Professor Ross Todd for their generous support of our 2014-2015 lecture series. I want to also thank Kamini Chopra at Sky for her active coordination of this event and our exciting day on campus with Mark and Barbara. I also thank everyone here who's made it to the event in the rainy weather, and I see some of my students here from Gender and Technology. Great to see you. I'm hoping that we'll have some Graduate School of Education folks come in. I've seen a couple of you, and then some computer science people. So I welcome you all for thank you for braving the weather. I'm going to start with the speaker bios and give a quick preface, and then turn it over to Mark and Barbara. So Dr. Guzdial is a professor in the School of Interactive Computing at Georgia Tech. He's a learning scientist and one of the foremost leaders in the discipline of computer education research. He invented the media computation approach to teaching introductory computing. He serves on the ACN's Education Council and is on the editorial boards of the Journal of the Learning Sciences, ACN Transactions on Computing Education, and Communications of the ACN. With his wife and colleague, Barbara Ericson, he received the 2010 ACM Karlstrom Outstanding Educator Award, and in 2014 became an ACN Distinguished Member, a title awarded to those who have achieved significant accomplishments or have made a significant impact on the computing field. He was also the recipient of the 2012 IEEE Computer Society Undergraduate Teaching Award, and we very much welcome you today, Mark. Barbara Ericson is the Director of Computing Outreach and a Senior Research Scientist for the College of Computing at Georgia Tech. She has worked at Georgia Tech to increase the quantity and quality of secondary computing teachers and the quantity and diversity of computing students since 2004. She's currently also pursuing a human-centered computing PhD at Georgia Tech. She has co-authored 4 books on media computation. She was the winner of the 2012 A. Richard Newton Educator Award. She has served on the CSTA's Board of Directors, the Advanced Placement Computer Science Development Committee, the NCWIT Executive Committee for the K-12 Alliance. And we very much welcome you today, Barbara. Thank you. So I have been following the work of my 2 colleagues here for many years, and it closely relates to my own research agenda. I've been very informed and influenced by their work, and I had the chance to interact with them initially at the NCWIT conference in 2014. The NCWIT is the National Consortium of Women in Technology. And there I really started thinking about the areas of convergence between ITI, computer science, and computing science education. And so in the abstract of that the speakers provided for today's talk, they cited some research on end-user programming that suggests that for every professional software developer in the United States, there are 4 more professionals who program as part of doing their job. So there's a growing need for computational literacy very much among a growing breadth of learners. And we really want to, in both fields, in computing science education and in information technology, informatics, we really want to expand these opportunities. So both disciplines have the goal of strengthening pathways for women and underrepresented minorities into rigorous educational opportunities that prepare students well for today's professional environments and also offer strong support throughout their journeys. So our speakers have a lot more to share about their experiences and work in this area. And so I'm going to hand it over to them, Mark and Barbara. Thank you so much for joining us today. Heartfelt gratitude, and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. So here's the general outline of the story that I want to talk to you about today. We want students, a lot of people, to have programming skills. Exactly as Rebecca was saying, the research from CMU Software Engineering Institute is that there's going to be a lot of end-user programmers in the world. There's a lot of people who are going to need to know how to program, but who aren't going to be professional software developers. Programming is hard to learn. We have lots of evidence for that. I'm going to offer a little bit of it. So you need motivation to get there. What's the motivation? Because it's a rigorous and important field, because there's jobs, because there's creative expression. We're going to explore that third reason for learning about programming. I'll tell you about media computation, and we're actually going to do a little bit of live coding hacking with media computation as an example lesson. And then Barbara's going to talk about along the pipeline, her work with from school children, elementary and high school students, up through teachers in using this approach. Take a look at this problem for just a minute. Lars is nodding. Yeah, I know this one. Okay. So if you've ever taken anything about programming, you look at this and say, oh yeah, sure, this is not a very hard problem. In the 1980s, Elliot Soloway gave this to students at Yale. Here were the results. The percentage of students who got it right. In the intro course, 14% of the students got it right. In the sophomore course, 36% of the students got it right. And then in an advanced systems programming class, 69% of the students got it right. Kind of surprising for what looks like a really easy programming problem. But this was an anomaly. Elliot repeated this study several times. Others have repeated this study, most recently Venable, Tan, and Lister in 2009. In 2001, Mike McCracken did the first of what we call MIMNI studies, multi-institutional, multinational studies. 5 institutions, 4 different countries gave all the same basic programming problem to build a small calculator. Out of a possible 110 points, the average score was 22.89. Ray Lister repeated a similar study in 2004, and Allison Elliott, too, in 2010, produced the first fundamental test of CS1 knowledge, language independent. All of these folks show that students actually don't learn as much about programming as we thought. It is hard to learn how to program. So what can we do? I love this quote. I first learned about it from Carl Wyman. There are 3 things to emphasize in teaching. The first is motivation, the second is motivation, and the third is, you guessed it, motivation. If we can't change programming, if we can't make it any easier, what we can do is try to motivate students to be able to increase its worth, to make it worthwhile for students to put in the effort to learn about programming. So why study programming? What kinds of arguments might we make? In most of the parts of the world where there's a real push to push computer science into the curriculum, the argument is being made that computer science is a discipline worthy of rigorous study. This is the argument that's being made in the UK in the Computing at School effort led by Simon Peyton-Jones. It's the argument that Tim Bell is making in New Zealand, that Michael Kasperson is making in Denmark. Here in the United States, our focus is more about jobs, that we study computer science in order to get jobs. So let me say a little bit more about each of those. This is a slide that Simon Peyton-Jones uses when he argues for why computer science is important to put into schools, that it's foundational and that it is useful to get a good job, but that's not why we want computer science in schools, at least in the argument that they're making it Computing at School effort. It's the 4th science. It's ubiquitous in all the different sciences. It connects to mathematics and all of the other STEM disciplines. It's a useful thing to know. It's an important, rigorous study for students to know about. That's the argument that's being made in most places. Here in the United States, we get these sorts of headlines in the Washington Post and the New York Times. This week, if you're not aware, this is CS Ed Week. Was it yesterday or the day before? Barack Obama became the first US president to code. On the video, he was doing programming. And so you're seeing more and more of these kinds of headlines. This just came out yesterday. In the Sacramento Bee, California is failing to produce enough computer scientists. And just this morning, Politico posted that seeking coders, tech titans turn to schools. You may be familiar with the Code.org video, which argues that there's 1.4 million IT jobs in the United States, but we only expect to have about 400,000 graduates in computer science in the next 10 years. This is a real problem. It totally is a real problem. But it's not motivating everybody. Computer science is still a very gender-skewed field. It's mostly white and Asian. It's mostly male. So the question is, who is not motivated by the current approach? Who could we get into the field if we were to change the way that we motivated? So it wasn't about getting a great job. It was about something else. I want to put up one slide. This is fairly complicated. I want you to take a minute to try to get it because I think it tells a really interesting story. It's a visualization by Brian Danielak. Each of these dots represents, in 2012, the number of people and the gender of the students who took whoa, that was weird. Okay, we'll try this again. Advanced placement computer science, advanced placement exams in different disciplines. So way up here on the right-hand side, that's studio art and drawing. It is by far the most female majority of all of the advanced placement tests. The size of the dot tells you how many people are taking it. So, there's the great big dots around biology and European history and Spanish language, and calculus is really ginormous. Here, that's computer science. It is by far the most male-skewed of all of the advanced placement exams, and it's really teeny tiny. We are not getting very many people, and we're getting a pretty homogeneous group. So let me tell you about media computation. As one way of making the argument to students, you want to learn computing because it allows you to communicate, to understand expression, to be able to create creative expression. So in fall 1999, Georgia Tech decided that all students who walked in the door had to take a course in computer science. It was part of the general education requirements. You take some science classes, you take math classes, you take social studies, and you take computer science. From 1992 to 2003, there was only one course that met the requirement. We tried a variety of approaches, a pseudocode approach, a scheme-based approach. But here's the bottom line of those 4 years. Each semester, less than half of the students in all of the college, all of the programs, in liberal arts, architecture, or business, passed this course. We're flunking more than 50% of them every single semester. All right? What's going on? Why are all these students failing the intro computer science, or withdrawing? I'm counting them withdrawing or failing, not getting a passing grade. Around the same time as that we were struggling with this, a number of really interesting studies came out that looked at computer science curriculum. The one at the top is the one that I most recommend, Unlocking the Clubhouse by Jane Margolis and Alan Fisher, but the Tech Savvy report from the American Association of University of Women, the AAAS also had a similar report. All of these have one theme in common, that students see the computer science curriculum as being tedious, boring, and irrelevant. Now, for any of you who have actually done any detailed programming, tedious, I can give you, maybe even boring at times, but irrelevant, isn't that sort of weird? How could you see computer science as being irrelevant in today's world? But it actually makes sense once you start talking to the students. Why would you come into a computer science class? Because you think that things like iPhones and iPads are cool, that ATMs exist. ATMs, you get money out of a hole in the wall. Isn't that amazing? There are Wii's. There are just so many cool things in the world. And you come into your first computer science class and we say, would you like to compute the next number in the Fibonacci sequence? I bet you want to solve the Tower of Hanoi. What does that have to do with all of the really cool things that computing can do? Right? That's where the sense of irrelevance comes in. What I want to do with computing is not what I'm doing in this course. So we decided to create 3 introductory computer science courses at Georgia Tech, each of them tuned to particular majors. So the one for engineers is in MATLAB, and all of the programming problems are about engineering problems. They actually solve problems that we got from faculty in aerospace engineering and chemical engineering and mechanical engineering. The computer science students and the College of Science students work with robots. They program robots because that's clearly a computer sciencey thing. They get into that. They recognize it as being relevant to them. I got the liberal arts, architecture, and business majors, and it was my job to motivate them that they needed to care about programming. And so that's where we developed media computation. The idea is to teach programming in a context of digital expression, where we're talking about programming across data abstractions. In every intro computer science course, you do something with all of the elements of a collection. Maybe you go through all of a bunch of numbers and compute an average, like the rainfall problem that I told you a moment ago. We do the same sorts of things in media computation, but we iterate across all the pixels of a picture to compute a grayscale, or maybe to reverse a negative. In every intro computer science course, you do something with only part of a collection, like only this substring we're going to do something to. We do the same sort of thing in media comp. We move the red eye here without changing any red that the person might be wearing. The same kinds of operations. We talk about algorithms. The way that we blend 2 images, where there's a sense of transparency and an overlap, is exactly the same process by which you have one sound fade out while another sound fades in. It's all a weighted sum. It's the same kind of an algorithm. And we get to talk about cool things like information encodings. We'll play with that a little bit later. I'm going to do more with code a little bit later and show you an example, but give you a sense of what kinds of things that we do. Here's Santa Claus on the left, appropriate this time of year. To clear the red from Santa, for each pixel in the pixel of the picture, set the red of the pixel to 0, and we get the green-blue Santa in the upper right-hand corner. If you set the red and the green and the blue to the same value, you get a scale of gray. And it turns out if you simply average the amount of redness, greenness, and blueness in each pixel, it's a pretty reasonable value. And so you end up with a grayscale Santa. Each of these values of red, green, and blue varies between 0 and 255. So if you subtract 255 minus each of those pieces, you get the negative, sort of the goth Santa dark elf look. One of the cool things that we do in the media computation classes is a lot of open-ended contextualized homework. So I want you to build me a collage. And I want you to take the same picture and manipulate it at least 2 more times, scale it, change the colors, crop it, anything you want, and then mirror the whole canvas. That's what we see here and here. I don't care what pictures you use. Use pictures that make sense to you. Use pictures that you like. Produce something that looks good. All right? We do similar things with images. I want to have at least 3 things moving, and it has to be a certain length of time. And I don't really care what's in your pictures. Tell a story. We do similar things with sound. One of the really cool things happens when you don't flunk out half of the students in the intro course. Some of them want to come take a second course. So we actually developed a Media Computation Data Structures course where we manipulate more advanced things. So in the right-hand corner, what looks like little flowers, you can see this, right, like around here, it's not. It's the baby picture that's in here spun on its corner and repeated, as it creates the flower-like approach. And then we also do things where, do we have anybody in here who's taught data structures? Okay, don't worry about it. Well, you have to. You just raise your hand. In data structures, you manipulate a particular kind of a data structure called a linked list, typically with words and numbers, and it's a really boring thing. We deal with it with pieces of MIDI. And we create canons, because canon is basically a repeated linked list. We have cool assignments like this one, where you are to make a flag of a particular country, but fill the colored segments with pictures representative of that country. I've taught media computation on a study abroad a couple of times and require the students to use pictures that they have taken while they're on their study abroad, which contextualizes the activity in the course that they're doing. So let me give you the first results, the first time we taught the course in spring 2003. On the left is the pass rates in those disciplines before media computation, and on the right was the first 3 semesters after we taught with media computation. I'm particularly excited that I have not taught the course much over the last 6 years, but we've kept the pace. For the most part, the pass rate has not dropped below 85% over the 6 years since we originally started with the course in general. And other schools are finding similar results. The University of California, San Diego, they changed their intro computer science course to one where they use peer instruction. You've probably seen clickers. Okay, so using clickers is actually a really effective technique for engaging students in a lecture. They use pair programming. Pairs of students actually do all the programming together, which helps students both in not get despairing of their assignment, but also improves learning because there's a social component to it now. And they use media computation. And they have found that they dramatically increase the retention of their computer science majors into the 2nd year, which is such a, for me, a fabulous result. They're on the quarter system. They changed 1 course in the 1st quarter, and they have more computer scientists in the sophomore year. Right, so changing the 1 course, having a new curriculum, changing the way they do lecture, changing the way the students program has had a dramatic effect. This paper won the Best Paper Award at SIGSI 2013. I want to say a little bit about our BS in Computational Media. The Computational Media degree, different from Media Computation. I'm sorry that the names are so similar. We have a bachelor's degree in Computational Media at Georgia Tech, which is based on these same things. It is not directly based on the course, but it's about preparing students to work in a world where they're going to know about narrative and media and also have some programming skills. The first 2 years of the Computational Media degree have the same exact computer science classes as the students in the computer science degree. So the first 2 years, the computer science classes are the same. But it's female. It's 45% female, which I believe makes it the most gender-balanced ABET-accredited computing program in the United States. The percentages are up in the right-hand corner. The weird graph at the bottom, the question was raised, okay, that's enrollment, Guzdial, but what about graduation rates? The graduation rates are really high, too. About 41% of our majors last year in computational media were female. So this model of using creative expression in media as a way of motivating learning about the computing is working and is drawing in a different kind of a population. All right, I'm going to drop out here for a little bit. Let me give you a little taste of what it's like to work in media computation. Let me tell you about how sound works. and how we put sound inside of a computer. So right now, my voice box is bouncing against air molecules, and these air molecules are creating increases in air pressure, and then they bounce off and they create decreases of air pressure. And that's what's hitting your ear. These bouncing air molecules hit your eardrum, create vibrations, and you now hear sound. We can talk about increases in air pressure and decreases of air pressure, and the number of these increases and decreases in a period of time, like a second, cycles per second, that's frequency, and that's our perception of pitch. And I've already bored everybody. So let me actually, actually give you a demo of this. Okay, so right now, those increases and decreases in air pressure are being captured and displayed from the microphone on this computer right now. What happened is I shifted the pitch from a low pitch to a high pitch and back down again. What happened to these waves? This is an interactive portion of the program. Yeah. That's right. As I got to a higher pitch, there were more waves in a unit time. They got narrower. And by getting narrower, it's a higher pitch, higher frequency. We perceive it as being a higher pitch because it's a higher frequency. Here's another way of looking at that exact same phenomenon. Hey. This is a fast Fourier transform. If you don't know what it is, don't worry about it. I don't really either. But I know how to demonstrate it. Well, so what you see is that it's showing us right now all of the energy at the different frequencies. Natural sounds, like my voice, it's got a lot of frequencies at once. A sung tone has a few number of frequencies. The whistle showed you the pitches increase from left to right, and the height of the spike shows you how much energy there is at that particular note. The point about there's a certain number of frequencies in a sung note is because musical instruments tend to have a similar pattern. And they're music to us because they have that kind of a pattern. I love that I can bring a harmonica to a computer science class. It really is computer science. Okay, so we got this wave that's moving all over the place. How do we get that into a computer? The computer only stores a whole bunch of numbers. All right, if we want to be able to manipulate sound on a computer, we've got to turn it into a bunch of numbers. How do we do that? Well, basically what we do is we take samples. You probably remember from integral calculus, so you might have tried to wipe it from your mind by now, that we can exactly capture a wave if we carry these little tiny rectangles and keep track of the height of these rectangles. The more rectangles we have, the clearer we can capture the sound. To capture the sound exactly requires, as you probably remember from integral calculus, an infinite number of rectangles, and we really can't afford that much memory every time you want to change your ringtone. So instead, we capture everything the human ear can hear. We capture up to, it's called 44,100 samples per second. It's using something called the Nyquist theorem. The really interesting thing is that we record sounds on a computer for humans. That's a short story. So at the end of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, on the vinyl, there's a tone that only a dog can hear. You're shaking your head. You know the story. Okay. It was a trick the Beatles played on their fans. You're listening to the album, wow, that was really great. Suddenly your dog goes crazy. Why does the dog go crazy? When you listen to the CD, you hear the tone. Because a CD is recorded using this idea for humans. It can't capture the frequencies that only a dog can hear. Okay? It's one of the advantages of vinyl. All right. So let me shift out to Jess. Okay, so let me go grab a sound. T equals make sound. This is a test.wave. Okay, explore T. Here's the sound.
This is a test.
Okay. Now, to make this sound louder, what we need to do is to stretch the wave. All of the positive sample values have got to get more positive. All the negative ones have got to get more negative. Here's a simple piece of code that'll do that. To increase the volume of a sound, for each sample, and all of those samples in that sound, get the sample value, multiply it by 4, and put it back inside that sample again. Okay, here's our original one.
This is a test.
Here's our new one.
This is a test.
Okay, do you buy that's louder? Maybe not. All right, so fine, I'll do it again. And maybe again. Okay?
This is a test.
Did you hear the sound in it? Okay? What that sound is that we've gone beyond the capacity of that much space of capturing the sound. If the sound were its normal waveform, it would be way bigger. But it's called clipping. We've gone beyond the capacity of the sound system to capture the sound exactly. Now, the first time I ever taught this, literally, someone in the back of the room, because it's always the troublemakers going in the back of the room, I know that, raised their hand and says, what if you set all the sample values at 32,767, the highest possible value? What would we get? Well, if all the sample values were exactly the same, you'd hear nothing. Because we hear vibrations. We hear increases and decreases. It's got to go back and forth. And I said, but I'll make you a deal. And I wrote this piece of code. For each sample in the samples of the sound, get the value out. If it's at all positive, give it the largest possible positive value. If it's at all negative or zero, oh no, I'm putting the zeros with positives. If it's less than zero, give it the largest positive negative value. Okay? So I'm going to go back and get our original sound again. Okay? So here's our original sound again.
This is a test.
And here it is maximized. There's the original. Here's the Before I press this button right here, what are we going to hear? You could explain what this means.
I'm worried it might be very loud.
Okay? Might be loud. What else can we tell about the sound? What will it sound like? Distorted?
Uniform noise over and over.
Uniform noise. Let me ask a very specific question. Will we hear the words, this is a test? Okay, at this point, I'm going to require you, all right, it's nasty of me, okay, I'm going to require you to vote. If you think we will hear the words, please give me a thumbs up right now. If you do not think we will hear the words, give me a thumbs down right now. Hold your thumb up. It must be visible, please. Everyone? Okay? Is there a vote back there? Okay, some people on the laptops. Okay, I get it. Okay, everybody's got their vote? Is there a vote? Okay.
This is a test.
Look at your thumb. Yes, you can switch it if you want to. It's all right. Okay. Why did we hear the sound? What's that?
There's variation within those waves. If you don't just hit a top and a bottom, you have a rise and a fall within them.
No, it's all the highest and lowest values only. There's no variation between these. There are only two values in all of those, which is another point we'll get to in just a minute. Yeah?
Are the waves that are closer together, those are sort of like the words with the volume is the height?
That's exactly right. I didn't change the frequency at all. Okay, the frequency of the, I changed the volume. I've totally messed with the volume. But the frequency, how often we go above, so the gaps in time, how compressed they are, exactly as you put it. That has not changed whatsoever. Okay? Human speech, we understand human speech mostly in terms of frequency, not in terms of volume. These about 9 lines of code, that just taught you something about how your human ear works, which you might not have known otherwise. Okay? And this is the kind of thing that we do with the media computation. It's about understanding how do we take the human experience and put it in a computer? How do we mess with it? What ways can we mess with it that are interesting? We do things like flipping sounds, making sounds shorter. We do things with images. Here's a piece of code that negates a picture. Here's creating a grayscale. In general, most of the manipulations that are based in Photoshop are some form of this code. For each pixel in the pixel of the picture, get the redness out of the pixel, the greenness out of the pixel, the blueness out of the pixel. Do something with red, green, and blue. Put them back in again. Okay? So I can explain a lot of how students manipulate digital pictures and digital sounds with a pretty few lines of code. I'm going to switch over to Barbara. We'll talk about using this idea of using creative expression to motivate learning about computing in other contexts.
So my job was the director of outreach for the College of Computing, and I was trying to grow more teachers and more students in computer science. So teachers, when I started in 2004, there were only about 44 schools in Georgia offering advanced placement computer science. This is a place that has about 400 high schools. So pretty low number of schools. And the exam had just switched from C++ to Java, and they said, oh, we don't really know that object-oriented stuff. Could you help us out? And Mark had been doing media computation, having some good results. And in Georgia, computer science is the business department, or the business and IT department. But they really don't know computer science, right? It's people who've been teaching web design or accounting, and so they didn't really know much computer science. So how do I get them started with computer science? Well, this approach has been working well with business majors at Georgia Tech. As Mark said, we used to fail over 50% of the business majors that went through this course, but with media computation, more of them were passing. The teachers are business majors. Perhaps this approach will work with them as well. Went and interviewed a bunch of teachers, went out and see what they were actually doing. And I actually looked at the standards in Georgia. There were 2 different computing courses that had programming in them. One was called Programming Systems Management. It was a very, very broad course. It had in it databases, user interface design, programming. And I said, oh my gosh, that's a lot to cover. Who's teaching all that? So I went out and watched what they were doing. The reality was, nobody was teaching all that. They were teaching what they could out of the books they had, which often don't match the standards, and calling it whatever they call it. And they were trying to stay a step ahead of their students. So a teacher would tell me, I don't really know this stuff, but I got told by the principal I'm going to teach it. And so I tried to read ahead and tried to stay a little bit ahead. And the course that I watched, a lot of them were using Visual Basic. And what they were doing in Visual Basic was, okay, everybody, okay, we're here now. Everybody click on this. Okay, now let's type this in. Now let's click over here. How many people do you think were actually doing that? I walked around the high school classroom. Yeah, nobody's doing that. And all she was doing was, creating something that would convert Celsius to Fahrenheit. Yeah, that's exciting to a high school student, right? I mean, the teachers told us, look, the kids, we don't know what we're doing. The material is not interesting to the students. The students don't understand why. Why should they calculate sales tax? Don't computers know how to do that? Why do I have to teach them how to do that? So the students didn't think it was interesting. What they thought they were going to do was make computer games when they took the course often, and the teachers didn't know how to do that. So it was a huge mismatch. So that's where I came in. So we tried media computation with the teachers and the students. One of the things that we found was with high school teachers is that if I tell them, hey, this has worked at Georgia Tech, they go, yeah, well, I don't have Georgia Tech students, so that's not going to work for me. So one of the things we had to also do was try it on real students, real high school students. So we started running computing summer camps to trial the approach on high school students to see, okay, will this work with high school students? What has to be changed to work in the high school setting? So for several years, we did, let me go back 1 second. We did summer camps. We run summer camps since 2004 for high school students, and we trialed media computation there. But one of the things that this led to as well is I was on the Advanced Placement Computer Science Development Committee, and at one point they asked for people to replace the current labs that they use, and so one of our labs became adopted and is used now this year. So I just got this email today, which I thought was kind of cool. So we created a picture lab where they do some of the media computation effects on pictures, and we got a nice email from, well, actually this was posted just on the listserv, it wasn't even sent to me, that they had a lot of fun with it. So we're excited about that. But we weren't surprised because we'd actually trialed this years ago, back in 2005, with high school students. And one of the cool things they enjoy doing, usually as sort of the capstone of the week, this was about a week, non-residential computing summer camp, from 9 to 3 every day. And we taught them how to do different image effects in Python. And at the end, what they would do is create a collage, and then we would print the poster, and they could take it home with them, which was also cool. So they brought in, just as Mark said with the undergrads, they used their own pictures, things that are meaningful to them. They even play with some ideas like recursion here. He was playing with this idea of recursion. And I love this. When this happened, I was like, yes. So we would have a parent show at the last day of the summer camp, and this boy had created this hip-hop collage, and he went up and was explaining what each of the symbols meant, and then afterward, he and his mother came up and they took their picture in front of it. I said, yes. You know you've got them when they're taking pictures of what they've created and they want to show it off. We also create green screen pictures where we take, when all you're doing is walking through every pixel in a picture and saying, hey, is it green? If it's green, replace it with some other background, or if it's close to green. So that's all this is, and they can put themselves in strange situations, make up their own environment. Now sometimes you get a little bit of green around it, so that's how you can tell it wasn't professionally done. And we just use cheap green screen. At one point we just had green paper. We had to have professionally lit cameras to do it really well, no shadows, but you get the idea just from doing cheap stuff. It doesn't have to be expensive. Well, with the teachers, so the very first time I tried this approach with the teachers, I was a little nervous. Okay, this is really different than what they've been doing. We're not doing Celsius Fahrenheit conversions. I'm not doing sales tax. I'm doing manipulations on pictures. But they enjoyed making collages as well. In fact, one of the cool things that I think happened was they all made very different collages. They all picked things that they thought were interesting to them. This teacher in particular I had a great time with. She had told me, I'm really nervous about this. I really don't know what I'm doing. I feel overwhelmed. And she came, had a great time. At one point, we had taught them how to mirror pixels in a picture. How do I take the left-hand side and mirror it to the right, or the top to the bottom? And then I said, okay, the really big challenge is diagonal. And so I gave that to them right before lunch. And then, lunch is announced, okay, let's go. And they're all sitting at the table still. And usually teachers can eat. So I was like, okay, what's going on? And they said, we're trying to figure out the diagonal. And they had a napkin out, and they were trying to figure out how to code it on the napkin. I said, okay, don't look now, but you're programming for fun and missing food. And they all started laughing. I never would have thought that I would be missing lunch to program. But she was so excited when she got diagonal working. I thought that was really cool. We do things like edge detection as well, so you can see in the one collage. And then we have a lot of fun with, we take their pictures in a green screen, and these teachers sent their principal a postcard. They would replace the green with the beach and said, we're having a great time at the computer science workshop, wish you were here. So that was a lot of fun. So besides media computation, which we've had great success with, both with teachers and students. So I told you, when I started in 2004, we had only about 44 schools offering AP Computer Science. Last year was 101 schools, and the number of kids taking the exam rose from less than 400 in 2004 to 1,500 last year. So we've had nice growth. Part of that growth was because we were able to get computer science to count as a fourth science. Georgia requires now high school students to take 4 sciences, 4 math. So it counts as a 4 science for high school graduation. It counts as a science or math for entry into Georgia colleges and universities. And that's really improved the growth. It's helped make it, part of the problem with being in the business department is they feel like they're not good enough because they're not in the academic departments. It was the only AP that they had in the business department, so they were interested in supporting it, but they always sort of feel like they're looked down on. So the fact that AP Computer Science counts as math or science for entry into Georgia colleges and universities, they're kind of like, yes, all right, we're doing real academics. So that's cool. We have tried out a bunch of other things and also had good luck with them. One of the problems we had with teachers, business teachers, was textual programming is hard for them. So one of the things I tried over the years, different approaches, and I found really good success with Scratch. If you haven't used Scratch, it's a drag and drop environment from out of MIT. It's very constructionist. You create all sorts of cool things with it. We've run competitions for years, and so these are just some of the things that the students have done. So this was an elementary school student. This was a middle school student. He actually went and visited the president. He's pretty amazing. So if you ever played Fruit Ninja, this is sort of similar to that, but he has this whole story, pre-story, about how Zombie is cooking and got some zombie juice in the food, and now the food is zombied. So you have to kill the zombie food. But you don't want to hit the bombs. So you slice the food, and it has different weapons for different levels. He put a lot of effort into this. If you kill the bombs, hit the bomb, it blows up. This is, Alice is similar to Scratch in that it's drag and drop programming, and so it's a little step up. So what we found with the teachers, it worked really well to start the teachers off who had no prior programming experience with Scratch, and then move them to Alice. Alice is similar to Scratch in that it's drag and drop programming, but it's 3D instead of 2D, so it's a little bit harder for some people, but it's a little more motivating for some students because they can make 3D movies. This is one of the high school winners one year. And what I really liked about this was a mixed team of boys and girls. Now in Alice, it's real easy it's hard to move objects, and sometimes they go right through each other. See? It's kind of funny. But just setting up all this 3D world is a lot of effort. And I liked them adding the song, contemporary song.
The librarianship connection there.
Yep. So they have camera movement besides the objects moving. So watch when they kiss. So yeah, one of the odd things in Alice, there is no physics, so you can go right through each other. We got a little sword play. When I asked most of the students for these competitions how long they spent on them, the answers were surprisingly light. And most of them would say 2 weeks. Death scene. Yeah, this is great sword play. It's still hard to do this. We know how this ends, it's not good. Another was a great takeoff. One of the things students often like to do is do remixes of popular culture or music or movies. So if you saw Inception, this is Aliceception. And I, for one reason, normally I had my students help grade these and judge these, and some miscommunication happens. I was up at 3 in the morning trying to judge these. When I saw this one, I went, okay, that's why I'm up till 3 in the morning. So Alice falls asleep. If you remember the movie Inception, you have dreams inside of dreams inside of. So she's asleep. I don't know if you can hear that. Question is, what happens when you start messing with the physics of a place, like in the movie, and now the road curls up? Now this is really easy in Alice, because there is no gravity. So you can make things float really easily. Saying, I'll come back for you. So as you can see, these students didn't think programming was irrelevant, boring, not creative, right? Other things that we do. So we do lots of work with Girl Scouts too, because we're trying to get more girls interested in computing, or Black Girls Code. And the biggest thing that we find from girls is creativity and working with others. That's the things they always mention. We do pre and post attitude surveys, and the things they always mention the most about, I had fun doing this activity because I got to be creative and I got to do stuff with my friends, or I got to meet people, or so social. So things like Spin Art, this is Lego robots, and Lego robots spun out of MIT, had a programmable brick, and when Lego took it over and commercialized it with the Mindstorms robot kit, they kind of went, oh God, they got it wrong. Because Lego published everything as vehicles. And what MIT was thinking was, more of a digital arts and crafts kit where you could do cool stuff like spin art. So it's taken a while, but now there's a lot of projects for Lego robots where you can do more creative art sort of stuff. But a lot of the things that are packaged by Lego are just vehicle-based. Dancing, doing drawing with robots, so you can put a pen in it and then you can have them draw different things. ArtBotics is a whole program of Holly Yanko in Massachusetts, and she uses Lego robots now to do art, to do installation art or create art, kinesthetic art. So here's basketball players that you have some sensors in front. There's a distance sensor here, so you change it when you're in front of it. So this is a Lego NXT robot. This is a bull that if you get close to it, it kind of gets mad at you and it starts moving things. So they use the Lego robots and repurpose them for making art, which is very popular. We've done that with our teachers, teacher workshops. They really enjoy it. The students enjoy it. AirSketch is another research project out of Georgia Tech. And the idea here is African Americans are not well represented in computer science. So one particular approach, though it's not only useful for African Americans, is let's teach people to program to remix music. The music industry these days is very computer-based. And this is a photo of young Guru, who is a hip-hop artist who came to visit the high school that was using this curriculum. They're using it for a CS Principles course, and telling them, look, these days, the music industry, everything's on the computer. And so if you can learn how to program music and work with music, you are way ahead. You ought to get in the music industry. And a lot of kids think they want a job in the music industry. So it's another way to reach people that we're always not traditionally reaching. So, well, thanks to our supporters. National Science Foundation has funded a lot of our work, and Georgia's Department of Education, the GBU Center, Institute for People and Technology at Georgia Tech. And there's more information at some of these URLs and copies of some of our books. We're open for questions. Yeah.
Good.
Okay, well, I'll jump in with a question. So thank you so much. This was really super interesting. And I think there are a lot of implications for the work that you presented for information science and for training students in both undergraduate and master's degree programs in the information science disciplines. And so I wanted to see whether you could just sort of maybe, you've thought about this a little bit, or even just off the cuff, talk about some of the connections that you might see between the CS media computation program and even the work in middle schools and high schools, and as we're developing pathways into the tech disciplines in higher ed, connections that you see between this work and then promise for ITI, for information science, Masters of Information.
Sure. I was editing the coding part on the fly because thinking about time, but somewhere I often take that. The observation was made over here about how many values were in the sound. There was really only two. There was the positive 32767, negative 32767, which meant that every sample was only a single bit. All right, so ignore the numbers, it was a single bit. Well, we can hide a single bit in lots of places. So it's pretty easy to take a sound and embed it inside of a picture. And that's called steganography. And it's because of things like that is why West Point, they have a required IT course for all of the cadets at West Point. They're now using media computation because they want to use a creative approach, but they also want their students, they want all Army officers to know something about how media can be hidden inside of media. The information aspects of media. It only takes a single bit per sample to record human intelligible speech. Wow, there's a lot of places you can hide bits. So yes, I think that there's we develop media computation to draw people to computing, but a lot of what we're dealing with is information, and information with a big I. And one of the things that's fun about media computation is that we can manipulate these and map to modalities. So we'll take sounds and turn them into pictures, and put sounds inside of pictures, and hide text inside of pictures, which is super easy to do. And these are all ways of exploring ideas of information using computational tools.
How about with data analytics? Like big data and...
Well, I can tell a little bit of the story of the course that I mentioned earlier. Yeah, so I've taught now twice a course called Computational Freakonomics. We use the book Freakonomics, Stephen and Stephen, so Levitt and Delpner. And it's on a study abroad, so it's 8 weeks. So each week we read one of the chapters, we discuss it, we do debates, like we debate the gun control issues, we debate the violent crime decrease because of Roe v. Wade issue. But in the second half of each week, I actually teach in scientific Python the social science methods being used in that chapter. Control of data in a large data set, t-tests, ANOVAs, correlations, the difference between correlation and causation. And then they will actually program those things in scientific Python. And in the last 2 projects in the course, the students grab live data sets. There's so many live data sets available. The Guardian has a whole website. They practice what they call open data journalism, where you can get all the data behind any of their stories. And then using scientific Python, my students ask questions about these data. One of the things that my students studied last time, everybody's heard about the drop-off in Olympic medals the year after you're the host country. You may have heard this. I was in the UK when the Olympics was there, and everyone's saying, "Oh, the British team are not going to win very many are not going to win many medals the next year, and the Chinese are not going to win many this year because it was China the year before." But actually, if you look at the year before and the year after, it's actually linear. It's the year that you host, you get a huge jump. And so that's the sort of analyses they do, looking out over the years of the Olympics. They also ask all kinds of really interesting questions from stock prices and what influences them. But yeah, so the computational freakonomics is a way of drawing in computer science in pursuit of understanding social science methods and relevance using live data that's available on the web today.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the lesson of what we're talking about is the motivation is important. So showing people what you can do with a small bit of programming is really powerful. You know, Mark had, you didn't show that quote, but they interviewed people after they took media computation. A lot of these were not computer science majors, and they interviewed them a year later, it was. And one of the quotes was, well, I did a bit of programming still a year later.
Well, we followed up a year after we started teaching media comp. And some 20% of the respondents said that they had done some programming since the course, because they found something that came up in their lives that was easier to write a piece of code than to go learn a new application. Yeah. Mike?
My impression is that you're giving the students certain packaged worlds in which they can write code with a large background in the form of a library for pictures or sounds. What I always worry about and find trouble with is when the students have to go out of the learning environment, they're somewhat at a loss.
So I think that's totally an issue if you care about developing software developers, but that's about 1/8 of all the programmers in the world. Most end-user programmers are not going to build things from scratch. Most end-user programmers don't even code from scratch. They code from modifying something else.
But they're not coding your particular sandbox.
Sure. So we teach them other sandboxes.
Oh, okay.
Right? The point is that, I mean, this is part of what we were talking about this morning. Python is in particular a great language for playing in other sandboxes. Python is an embedded language in a lot of tools, like the Blender video editing system, photo editing system. You can code it all in Python. Photoshop is programmable. GIMP is programmable using Python. Python is a great tool for manipulating sandboxes, to use that term. So we give them a sandbox to get them started. And it's one that we particularly designed to give them the ability of manipulating digital media, which is what they care about. For the majors that we originally developed Media Comp for, liberal arts, architecture, and management, the computer is not a tool for calculation as much as it's a tool for communication. We're teaching them about how to use computation for manipulating the digital communication media.
I think Mark's point about that they're not necessarily going to be writing from scratch. Many people are not going to be writing from scratch. One of the interesting things was one of his students was following graphic designers who had taught themselves to code. Now the problem is they don't even know the language when they're stuck. And so they would focus on the names of variables and Google names of variables instead of knowing that what I need is a condition. So you're trying to get them started and at least learn the language of code. What is a conditional? What is a loop? So that they can be more effective, not necessarily be software developers.
I have a question. Couldn't we treat programmers as vocational workers as opposed to professionals? So, not everybody has, a four-year career, a four-year college in their mind, couldn't they just go to a technical school and learn programming, since basically what you said before was a lot of it is off-the-shelf tools that one could use, they're not going to be programming from scratch?
I don't think that we were saying anything here about we need more computer science majors. What we've been talking about is how do we optimize people's learning of computing? How do we help them to learn to program? Could they go do VOTech? Sure, but if you're going to go become a scientist or engineer, why go get a 2-year VOTech degree? The argument that we're making, I completely agree with the argument that Simon Peyton-Jones is making. Computing is the workbench of science and engineering today. Computing is increasingly the workbench for people in business and all other disciplines. That finding by Chris Scafidi, Mary Shaw, and Brad Myers from CMU, that the 4-to-1 is the easy. We know for sure that for every software developer out there, there are 4 more people who are actually programming who are not professional software developers. What's deeper in the data is that there are people who are doing programming but don't know what they're doing is called programming. They're doing SQL database queries. They're creating new macros for spreadsheets. According to Chris Scafidi, the actual ratio is more like 9-to-1. A vast number of people need to learn how to program. It's a new form of literacy. And we need to be able to prepare everyone to be able to be functional in that computational literacy.
So I don't think we were arguing that everybody has to be a CS major. No, I think there's certainly room for lots of different along the spectrum. I used to work with doctors who were teaching themselves how to code. And I used to say, oh my goodness, they went to med school, they went to internships, they did residency, and they find out they don't want to be doctors. And now they're trying to do database work, but very badly, because they really don't know what they're doing. So there are a lot of people who don't know what they're going to need to know down the road. So I see there's a huge continuum all the way from people who need PhDs in computer science to people who just maybe need a little bit of programming experience. And you could get that lots of ways.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that not everyone should get the impression that the only way to learn programming is to go to a 4-year institution.
No, we don't think that.
No, rather I'd like to see computer science in every science and mathematics course in the United States. That's the way to learn computing.
You mentioned that 9 people program versus 1 actually focused on it. How many teachers program? Because if you don't have it instilled in the way they think, how do you transport that to students?
This is a huge worldwide issue right now. Everyone is dealing with where are we going to get enough computer science teachers?
No, I don't mean.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You said the average person's programming in life. Mm-hmm. Is the average teacher programming in life?
No, of course not. Because we have very few teachers who have any experience with computer science at all.
Then why don't you just bring business people and other people into the schools rather than trying to train people so they know a little, and what they transport on might not engage people because the teachers were at first hesitant even to learn this.
Because business people and other people who are software professionals aren't teachers.
No, I don't need them to be professionals. If you said average people are programmers, so why don't we bring in more average people?
Into schools?
Yes.
Well, so there is a Microsoft Teals program that tries to pay Microsoft, well, it started with Microsoft, it's gone beyond Microsoft now, but tries to get Microsoft professionals to go in and teach advanced placement computer science. But the problem is that's not sustainable. They're not paid to teach that. They're over time they lose interest, they get interested in it, they do it a little bit, and then they quit. But there's no then sustainability. You want the teacher, the person who's going to be there, who's going to have the most leverage. That's why I work with teachers, to try to get teachers up to speed. You don't have enough of anybody to do this.
Okay.
Teachers have a particular skill and motivation, and we need to have respect for teaching. That's one of the problems we have in the United States, that there's Finland, for example, really appreciates their teachers, and they get really good teachers, and they get really good results. I think that we need to think more about developing our teachers. I wrote an article recently that we're over 100 years behind the other STEM disciplines. One way of measuring that, the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics was formed in 1920. They're almost 100 years old. And at the time, there were already lots of mathematics teachers in the world. The American Association of Physics Teachers was founded in 1930. And there were already lots of high schools that offered physics. The Computer Science Teacher Association was founded in 2005. And less than 10% of US high schools have a computer science teacher. We have a long way to go.
In teaching, I guess bringing computer science concepts to high schools, do you find that you get a greater diversity of like applicants to college among different genders and races? Has it sort of solved the digital divide there? And or is it helpful?
Well, so advanced placement computer science, as Mark said, is extremely still gender biased. It's way more male than studio art is female even. So there's a huge problem. There was a nice WGBH study, ACM study of college-bound teens that found that the majority of boys, 76% of boys, thought a career in computing was a good thing for someone like them, whereas only 22% of the girls did. So we have this huge perception problem. I'm heartened that last year, some of the largest states, like California, their AP computer science has really grown. And often when the number of people go up a lot, the female percentage even drops. But last year it stayed high, it was 25%. We were at a high of 40% back in the 80s and we dropped. We're one of the few fields that became less female over the years. So I'd like to see us get back to that 40% at least, if not better. So I think it takes a lot, and I don't think as long as computer science is considered an elective in high school, I don't think you're going to see parity. If it becomes a requirement in high school, just like with math, years ago they used to say, oh, women aren't good at math. Well, that's been disproven, and women now are about 45%, or in calculus are close to 50% of the test takers. But it's because it's become required. So I think, sort of required, right? If you're going to college in a certain field, you're going to take calculus. So I think computer science has to be at that level for us to really reach parity.
Great talk, and could you comment a little bit about people's perceptions about themselves in terms of self-efficacy or how they perceive themselves before and after taking some of these classes, either in your own work or if
well, one of the things I want to report is from the summer camps. Of course, this is a well-known finding, but boys and girls have the same ability. The girl thinks she's here, the boy thinks he's here. So we see that with our summer camp data. The boys come in with higher confidence. The girls have lower confidence to start. They gain the most from the computing summer camps, but they're still lower than the boys. So it takes a lot to get the girls to think they're at the level of the boys. A lot of times the boys are truly aware of their own ability. They think they're a lot higher than they actually are. There's some studies that show in computer science, at least, that the boys who stay have lower grades than the girls who leave. But the girls think they're not doing very well. So there's a lot of issues there.
So I think you're probably getting at like Carol Dweck Mindset's work.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So Carol Dweck was an educational psychologist at Stanford. Has done a lot of work about how students' mindset towards a field influences success within that field. So if you come into a field believing that if your basic mindset is that intelligence is a fixed amount, and I'm either good at something or I'm not. So if you take your first math class and you fail your first math test, you decide, if you have a fixed mindset, well, I must not be good at math. That must not be a skill that I have. The growth mindset is a mindset which says, oh, you can actually get better at things by working harder at them, thinking about intelligence as being a malleable construct. And it's possible to shift students from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. If you have a growth mindset, you're much more likely to be successful because you put more effort in. We have lots of issues with mindset in computer science. There was a really interesting study several years ago looking at students who drop out of computer science or who fail and who plan to take it again. The number one factor which influenced whether or not they succeed in the next class is to what they attributed their failure in the last class. And if they attributed the failure to luck, it was just bad luck last time, they're not going to succeed in the next class because they're not going to do anything different. It was just, it's luck, bad throw of the die. So we certainly have issue with mindset with students. I have concern, I've written several pieces arguing that the field as a whole, computer science, has a fixed mindset perspective. We tend to believe that people are born programmers. You'll hear people talk about a geek gene. You either got it or you don't. And we know that's wrong. I mean, all of our evidence says that that's incorrect. But it's pretty pervasive. You see it in the industry. People talk about that they want to get to people who are 10 times better than the rest, that are 2 sigma better, as opposed to why not grow people so that they're as good as you want them to be. It's not something which is really built into the computer science culture today. Should we go here and then Sharon?
So can I follow up on that a little bit, because I struggle with this a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm giving people advice. So I definitely like to send the message, to my son as well as my students, right? That you didn't do that well now because you need to practice. That's what practice is for and
Sure.
learning is for. And so I definitely try and send the message like you can be good at this. But I think also, and especially by the time you get to college students, you don't want to sort of. There is something about connecting with the ideas or just liking it.
Mm-hmm.
Natural talent helps, to like something, so they're not separable. But so, because I don't think you want to say you can do this, you should do this. Don't explore.
Deliberate practice makes anybody better.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that within a semester you can catch up to the kids who've been programming for years and years and years, and you've just seen it for the first time.
But, so, I think one of the things that your student, Mike, found, right, is that people confuse how well I do in a course with liking the course.
Yeah.
So he had a student who was investigating why people study computer science and how they study computer science. And we see this with our own kids. Our daughter's in college now. And if they don't do well in a course, I'm not good at this. It's me. I hate this subject. Even though the semester before they said I like that. So people often confuse how did I do with what am I good at.
Yeah, my student, Mike Huner, is now professor at Rose-Hulman, did a study of how students make their choices, make curricular choices. In particular, how does students not really understanding what computer science is influence their curricular choices? And it turns out not very much at all. For the most part, once students choose a major, they simply follow the curriculum. They simply follow the path. They don't even know. He interviewed juniors who didn't know what was in their senior level classes, given the titles of them. That's not how they think about it. They think about just completing the curriculum. But how do they choose their major? For the most part, it's whether or not they like the course. And sort of a real problem here is that students choose whether or not they like a particular course, and they don't take into effect, well, that was a 7 o'clock in the morning lecture, and I probably didn't like getting up that early, but I just think that field is not for me. Students use liking something as a proxy for, I have an affinity for it. Sure.
So for the high school females who participated in your camp and their self-efficacy rose, have you tracked those individuals and their participation in computer-related fields or disciplines in college, and whether their self-efficacy continues to increase, or does it drop back down again?
So we did, it's hard to do follow-on studies over years, it's been since 2004. We've had people self-identify to us that are at Georgia Tech, and we've interviewed them to get their stories always, which are wonderful. I had this great story from an African-American male who told me, he said, I just ran into him, I was trying to hire students actually, and he said, oh, do you have anything to do with summer camps? He said, that's why I'm here at Georgia Tech. I'm like, I need your story. And he said, my mom signed me up for this computing summer camp back when I was in high school, and I thought, oh my goodness, it's gonna be all those geeky kids who like doing pi, calculating pi or whatever to whatever digit, and I don't even wanna go. He came, he did media computation, he had a great time. He came, he took AP Computer Science, got a 3, which is passing but not stellar. He was most outstanding junior his junior year at Georgia Tech. So to go from, I don't even want to go to this computing summer camp, to this is what I want to do. And he was TA for media computation courses, and he was convincing other people to do computer science. And people tried to stop him saying, wait, you're African American, you can't go into computer science. There's no African Americans in computer science. He's like, yeah, I like the field. But it's hard to get enough, he faced pressure still from people that you don't belong in this, but he eventually overwhelmed it. And we also had a female student who came to our camps between sophomore and junior year, and that's the only thing she did. She took no other computer science in high school, but she decided then that she wanted to work in gaming for Turner Broadcasting. And she came and she worked for me while she was an undergrad. She did outreach with us and we ran summer camps and things, and she got her job at Turner. She got her dream job at Turner and was a gamer. So, but one of the big things that we did, because it's hard to individually follow those people without self-report, was we did a big survey of people in computer science or computing courses across the University System of Georgia. We had 20-some schools.
Yeah, we had about just over 2,000 students responded, taking CS1 or CS2 in 2012.
So we asked them, how did you get here? Did you take, was it family influence? Was it, what got you interested in computer science? Why are you taking these courses? And then we did regression tests to see what were the factors. And for women, the biggest factors were encouragement and exposure. Did they get exposed to computer science and were they encouraged to pursue it? Whereas for men, ability and encouragement were equally predictive, but for women, encouragement was much more predictive than ability.
And for underrepresented minorities.
Yes.
So it was joint. Just having ability alone didn't lead them into computer science.
And the other thing that we found was schools that had sent teachers to our teacher workshops produced statistically significant, it was not statistically significant.
No, but it was
produced more female and underrepresented minorities than schools who had not. So it's hard to get that exact.
Well, I know the study that I worked with at Indiana University where we were talking to females who were in computer science as well as in other tech-related disciplines, that encouragement piece was huge with the people who were in particularly computer science. And if that encouragement came from the fathers in particular, that was a really big point too, that came out in the interviews.
One of the things I did with the Girl Scouts that I loved was the fathers would go camping with their daughters. I called it Dad and Me. And we would do robotics. We would bring Georgia Tech females, and we would do a robotics session with the dads and their daughters. And it was kind of funny watching the dads, because the dads would come in and be like, here's a female student that's helping out. Oh, hi, I see you're at Georgia Tech. What are you majoring in? They'd say computer science. You see their face kind of go, what? You know, they just blow their conceptions of computer science. And then the dads would say, oh, my son would love this. And we'd be like, your daughter's enjoying it too. But it was really neat to see the dads kind of go, oh, there are women at Georgia Tech doing computer science. Okay. You know, the girls they were too young to really kind of get that, but the guys were getting it. And then we would hand them brochures of computer science. So I love doing that.
Joanne Cahoon has done a lot of work in this area. She's looked at what leads to success at the undergraduate level and what leads women to go from undergraduate into graduate. And she similarly says that a sense of encouragement and a sense of belonging is critical to both retaining in computer science and going on to graduate school. Well, one of her findings that a lot of guys, particularly in computer science, don't realize, I have to put the guys on the spot here, where the encouragement comes from, it doesn't matter the gender. The male professors were just as effective as the female professors at encouraging the females to stay in computer science and to go on to graduate school. And so it's our job too.
And another finding was no encouragement is discouragement. So if you think, oh, that's not my job, I don't need to encourage the women or the minorities, you are actually discouraging them if you do that. So it's not difficult to encourage people. It's fairly free.
Mike?
One of the things many studies say is that these biases that computer science is or is not for me start very early in life. And so people have looked at what are the first contacts with computers that kids have. And the fear had been in the past that as long as that first contact was shoot 'em up video games that appeal mostly to boys, it would turn off the girls. But now, for most of these people, I think their first contact is Facebook or Twitter or some social media system.
Well, people had their toddlers, their phones.
So the question is
to play games
this a
with.
visible effect that people say, you know, well, gee, I'd like to work on something like Facebook someday?
I don't know, but I want to just raise some question about the first statistic. Yes, it is true that early exposure can lead to more interest in computer science. However, my boss, my school chair right now, didn't meet computer science until she became an undergraduate. When we did our study of a couple thousand students across Georgia, one of the things that we found, and this is correlation, not causation, but that the women in underrepresented minority were far more likely to have had some sort of computer science experience in high school than were the white males. Now, that doesn't mean that having it in high school makes you go into computer science. But it is the fact that for a lot of women in underrepresented minorities, they may not see computer science until high school or later. Not computer science, not the gaming.
Right.
Did you have something you wanted to add? I was going to tell the glitch story too.
Well, so our own daughters, when they were little, would play with Game Boys, and they said, where's the game girl? You know, so that was definitely already, you know, wait, that's not for you, that's for boys. So let's make it purple and pink, and that's for girls. But anybody see the Barbie story?
Yeah.
So one of our PhD students, Casely Fieser and Miranda Parker that work with us, did a remix of it. So if you haven't seen that, that's good to see. But this is the kind of stuff, you know, that happens very young. You walk into any toy store, it becomes very clear what the gender barriers are. You know, all the pink stuff's over here, all the blue stuff's over here, and then there's a little bit in between with puzzles and things. You know, but like Legos, my daughter still doesn't play with Legos, and she finally said, "Where are all the girl minifigs? All the little minifigs are boys, and you have to buy giant sets to get a couple of girls. It's just ridiculous how boy gendered it is." And she loved playing with Legos, but she eventually went, wait, am I getting the message this is not for me because there's no little girl minifigs? So we do a lot in our culture. It's kind of interesting in some countries, computer science is female. And they have a great point when we tell them, well, wait, no, in the Western world it's considered male. And they say, what about this is male? It's not heavy lifting, it's not dangerous, it's not dirty. We think of it as like sewing. It's indoor work, it's creative. Which is a great point, right? Well, how did it get to be gendered male? When it isn't dirty or dangerous So a lot of it has to do with culture and how the culture perceives it.
Let me tell a brief story. Betsy DeSalvo's dissertation work at Georgia Tech, Glitch. So yes, there is a study that showed that something like 30% of all male computer scientists got into the field because of video gaming. That's what they attribute it to. African American and Hispanic teen males play more video games than any other demographic, but they're the smallest demographic in computer science. It is clearly not causal. So, but Betsy DeSalvo was really interested in how would you get African American teen males to turn their interest in video gaming into an interest in computer science. And part of it, she's done some wonderful work about how African American teens play video games different than white teens do. White teens do a lot of modding and looking for Easter eggs. And for the African American teen males that she studied, it's a field of play, it's competition. You wouldn't mess with the basketball or the basketball court. You want it to be completely even. So no modding, no Easter eggs, which means that you don't treat it as a malleable technology. So she hired African American teen males to be video game testers. It was a paying job. She got video game studios in Georgia, in the Atlanta area to give her games that need to be tested, paid them. These students received a lot of positive feedback from their communities, from their families, not because they did computer science. They didn't tell them they were doing computer science because they had a paying job. They had a paying job at Georgia Tech that had some prestige associated with it, that played to their values even more than their interests. And then so becoming video game testers requires you to see it as a technology, requires you to see, oh, there's a bug here. It wasn't supposed to do that. Now, how do I explain to the programmer why it did, how to replicate that? All of Betsy's students graduated high school, and something like 80% of them went on to post-secondary computer science. That's a really interesting example of not having any experience with computer science as a field until quite late. But it was still pitched well, pitched about being your values more than just your interests. It was very effective.
So I have sort of a follow-up question to that. We've been talking a little bit about the, the growing need for training students in all of these areas, and then also how different programs are meeting these needs. Can you speak for a second? Because I know in the ITI program we've been really seeing an increase in our enrollment, and I think that across the country, CS programs are actually seeing a growing interest, and I think in part it could have to do with younger and younger learners' awareness of technology and technology pieces, and this is sort of a field that they might want to go into. So how does that growing interest play into some of the gaps that we're seeing, and where we are in terms of even staffing colleges and things like that?
In some ways, it makes it worse because what happens then is people put quotas, put caps on things because they can't handle that increase. So this happened in the past, and we think it's one of the reasons where it became gendered male. Some of the early computers were female. It was a job description originally, computers, and the secret Rosies were doing calculations in World War II.
Yeah.
But one way that it became male is when it became popular and people put caps on it. If boys get interested early, which is one of the things that happens, then they get the jump. And so they get into the programs, they get under the caps, and it becomes even more gendered male over time. If the women, so often women don't get an interest in computer science as boys tend to fall in love with it as a machine. I love this machine, I want to work with it. Whereas women think of it as a tool, I want to use it to do something. And they don't get as interested in it or as obsessed with it as often the boys do. This was from Unlocking the Clubhouse, where they follow through this. But that leads to keeping the women out. I mean, one of the ways that CMU changed their percentage of females was to stop requiring prior programming experience.
And the caps can apply just to why?
Well, Berkeley has so during the 1980s when there was the big spike, Berkeley actually required a 4.0 in the prerequisite computer science classes to become a computer science major. Berkeley has now reinstituted those caps for their letters and sciences computer science degree at 3.0. At Georgia Tech, we've just decided that students who want to transfer into computer science must have a 3.0 or better in the first 2 computer science classes. It's happening already. And you know, who's going to get a 4.0 in their intro course? Well, somebody who's had an awful lot of computing experience already. And because of how little computer science there is at high school, because of who gets exposed to it early on, it's going to more likely be a white or Asian male. There's huge socioeconomic status issues here too. The richer kids are the ones that are going to have access to computer science classes. Where APCS is and the wealth of the district is very highly correlated.
And we're putting caps on because we can't meet the capacity in universities and schools, so we don't have enough faculty.
That's right. Stanford, Georgia Tech, other schools are being told explicitly by the administration, now you've had spikes like this before, no new faculty. And so, to mention there, in my blog today, I was allowed to post, Google has just started a pilot program with 35 universities. They're offering money for people to figure out how to do this, how to deal with increasing capacity without reducing the diversity.
I am seeing so much friction in the K-12 environment. So this week we're celebrating the hour of code, and that's going on for certainly more than an hour for several days. And the blogs of the tech people in K-12, especially the elementary level, are just rich with experimentation and the voices of children. At the same time, at the elementary level, we're seeing an extreme narrowing of curriculum because whatever gets tested, of course, is what gets taught. And so, especially in areas where the equity is the greatest issue, we're seeing lessened and lessened opportunities in literacies that really ought to matter most. I see this as a language literacy as I see foreign language or world language as a language literacy. And we're narrowing it out, just as we're narrowing out music and art and these wonderful introductory opportunities where kids can gain fluency at a young level. And I'm hoping that the other bus comes around real quickly. We're seeing things like the super amazing Sylvia. I don't know if you must read her books, and her websites are these fabulous girl tutorials. I was able to review her recent book. Gary Stager is one of her, she's a protege of sorts of his. But we're seeing these celebrations or recognition of need, and yet on the ground, we're seeing a narrowing, and schools are getting punished if they don't meet assessments in very narrow places, and I'm worried about that.
Yeah, I agree. I see that I don't have an answer. I see that there's a bunch of strategies that people are pursuing to try to make things better. The Exploring Computer Science project out of UCLA is about trying to figure out what kinds of computer science goes into minority-serving high schools that have never had computer science before. How do you get things started? How do you bootstrap the programs? And they've had a lot of support from UCLA. Chicago Public Schools has decided that Exploring Computer Science goes into all of their middle school and high schools over the next 5 years. That's a nice start. The other approach that I think is really interesting is the approach of Bootstrap and the NetLogo project at Tufts. Thinking about how do we incorporate computer science into the existing math and science curricula in order to achieve those goals. So Uri Walensky's group at Northwestern has done a wonderful job of figuring out how the use of their technology meets next generation science standards. So learn some computer science, and teachers, you want this because it helps you figure out how to solve these hard problems of next generation science standards. Bootstrap, it's a really cool project. It's about using programming to help kids pass Algebra 1. And we know that Algebra 1 is one of those gatekeeper courses. If you don't pass it, you're much less likely to ever go on to college. So let's use programming as a way of motivating and improving learning in Algebra 1. So I think that we need to explore a wide variety of strategies. I see the problem, but I see some really hopeful opportunities to solve it.
I have a question about something you mentioned earlier. You said basically that a lot of minority students or African-American students in particular, they're kind of more exposed to gaming versus computer science. And I know for me, my younger brother is actually really passionate about gaming, wants to go to school for it, what have you. And I kind of want to find a way to bridge the gap for him so that it's not just gaming, it's also computer science, because I know he has the capacity to do well
So games that you can mod is one way to sort of start that interest. I know our son actually played with
I think it was World of
World of
Warcraft.
Warcraft, where you can actually program it. So actually, he was programming, not realizing he was programming. You know, and then when we saw what he was doing, we said, you're actually programming is what you're doing. So that's one way to kind of get him interested. There's things called Game Maker, which is a way to create games. Game Salad's another environment. So if he's interested in that and creating games, you can build on that by sort of moving him into, well, it's fun to play games, but what about modding games or creating your own games?
And there's a number of folks are building computer science curricula around that starting point. So the Racket programming language, which is a variant of Scheme, has come out of the book about how to get started with Racket, all in terms of building your first video game. Lots of kids who do Scratch and Alice start out by building games in those environments.
And Bootstrap, they use it to build games. So a lot of these people are building off of that interest in games. The thing I caution about games is it tends to appeal more to boys than girls. But that's okay if you're working with a boy and you want the boy to do that. But
Yeah.
and the part of the problem with girls, you were saying the shoot 'em up games. What's interesting to me about that is women actually play more games now than men do. And middle-aged women play more games, but it's these social games, you know, Farmville and Candy Crush and whatever. But when you talk to kids about games, when I was working with middle school students and I asked about computer games, I said, hey, do you guys play computer games? They said, oh, no. I said, really, you don't play, what were those little animals you could buy? Web kittens?
Angry Birds.
Well, Angry Birds or whatever. And they said, oh, yeah, we play those. I said, what did you think I meant when I said computer games? They said, oh, first-person shooters. So it's kind of interesting that word game often has that connotation to the girls that, oh, you're talking about first-person shooters. Even though they play games, you know, that they think that's not for them then.
And to the gamers.
And to the gamers who think that's really not for them.
Yeah, we own this.
One more question, I think we have time for. Chris?
So you mentioned that CS meeting that fourth science requirement. Was that a Georgia-specific?
Well, several states, I think we're up to 18 states now, have gotten it to count as either math or science. And it's something that code.org, who's pushing the hour of code, has been pushing in states. And we've been working on it through our ESEF, which is Expanding Computing Education Pathways Alliance. We've been helping states with that as well.
Because there's also been movement to make programming need a language requirement.
Yeah, in some
right?
states.
In some states.
Yeah, really bad idea.
Yeah, it's
you think it's a bad idea? Well, I was interested in your comparison between those two.
Yeah, for a variety of reasons. So in Georgia, the governor has announced that there are more computer science, not just APCS, are going to count towards math, science, or foreign language requirements. And there's a lot of folks who are attacking the foreign language requirements as not being relevant for today's world, which I don't agree with. It's also setting up this very strange tension within the schools. I mean, the math or science teacher, Barbara's had a lot of success with getting them to teach computer science. Not so much foreign language teachers. We have a lot of trouble with getting business teachers to teach computer science because they don't have a lot of math or science background to adopt a lot of the issues in computer science. The big issue that we have with ESEP, our Expanding Computing Education Pathways, is that all the decisions about K through 12 are left to the individual states. And some states push it completely off to the districts. Nebraska has 0 statewide high school graduation requirements. Every single district gets to decide whatever they want. Now, it turns out to be the same in California, but all California high schools want their kids to get into the UCal or Cal State systems. So those admission requirements become the de facto high school graduation requirements. We're learning about it's very complicated in every state. I think it's Texas, New Mexico, and Kentucky that have made this foreign language switch off.
Well, so one of the reasons I worry about the foreign language one is you have to realize that high school isn't the end for a lot of students, that they're going to college. And if the colleges require 2 foreign languages and the students don't know that and they don't graduate with them, you now have a barrier for where they can go. And so you can't attack it just at this level, you have to think about the next level. So when we first got AP Computer Science to count as a science, it then went to the University System of Georgia, who said, well, basically, the Career and Technical Education Department threw a whole bunch of stuff up and said, hey, count all this stuff as for science. And they said no to everything in Career and Tech Ed. And we said, wait a minute, did you even look at AP Computer Science? And so they went back and looked at it and said, okay, we'll count that as either a science or math. But you have to be really careful about, you can't just fix one level. You have to be thinking about the next level, too. If you take away foreign language in high school, but they need it to go to college, you're really in trouble.
Okay, well, I think we can all agree this is a very enriching and enlightening conversation today. Thank you again, Mark and Barbara, for joining us here today at Rutgers. I look forward to the rest of the afternoon with you.
Thank you for joining us.